We're going to start off blocking out our rough forms with our sculpting brushes. I first want to turn symmetry on by hitting the S key. I'm choosing a regular brush alpha, and holding down the shift key I can just tap one side, and I'm going to choose sim copy, because when I was creating the tail I just worked on one side, so that copied from the side that I last worked on to the opposite side. So that's all I need to do, is just barely touch one side. That tells 3D Coat which side I'm copying from. I selected the Move tool and just going to tweak a few things here. Okay, I'm ready to move on to the Fill brush, and that will help me fill in any major cavities, crevices, gaps, and so on. So I'm going to hit my wireframe hotkey, which is W, to visually inspect the density of the model. Another means of gauging the density of your model is by looking toward the bottom center of the user interface, and you can see under Object Triangles the poly count for the currently selected layer. I would strongly suggest using both means to gauge the true density of your model, because it may seem like 10 million or 20 million is quite sufficient for a character, but in reality or in practice it's not. You may need that much just for the face region alone, and then the rest of the body might not even require 5 million, so it really just depends on the situation. By the way, I want to mention that I'm using the Grow brush in voxel mode, and some artists prefer working in surface mode when they're sculpting. Others prefer working in voxel mode. Sometimes I like to at least do some of the initial blocking stages in voxel mode. It has a little bit of a different feel than working in surface mode, and some of the brushes act much differently as well. This Grow brush applies smoothing while you're brushing. Some artists like to work with very rough brushes or rough strokes. It's really just a matter of preference, but as I'm initially blocking out forms, a lot of times I like to work with very soft strokes. Going to try and carve out the inner part of the mouth. And this time I'm using the Build brush because I don't need quite so much smoothing. A lot of it depends on the brush alpha that you choose as well. So the brush itself has a certain behavior, but that changes quite a bit depending on the type of brush alpha you choose. Brush behavior is also heavily affected by the draw mode that you choose in the E panel. What this means is, as you apply pressure with your stylus, then 3D Coat is going to either increase or decrease certain properties such as opacity, depth, and overall brush radius. And then you have a draw mode that actually is not affected by any brush pressure at all, and that's your absolute brush draw mode. I'm now using the Build brush, and it does not have the same type of smoothing effect when you're brushing as does the Grow brush. And there is one major distinction here, and that is when you use the Grow brush, your brush alpha is not taken into account. So you could have a rocky, craggy brush alpha using the Grow brush and it won't affect it at all, whereas most of the other brushes do. I hit my hotkey combination to bring up the image plane preview options and the gizmo in order to adjust the inner opacity so that I can see more of my image plane through the object. So the higher the value, the more you can actually see that image plane through your object. I'll go ahead and close it. Getting back to the Build brush now, it pretty much does as the name implies. If you click, hold, and drag, it's going to continue building as you brush back and forth. However, if you're working with a clay brush, it's very similar in the overall result, but it does not build continuously. It kind of stops at a static height, contingent upon the depth value you have set. Just using the move tool here to kind of tweak and move some parts of the surface here. By the way, if the symmetry plane is a bit annoying for you, or you just prefer to turn it off, you can always hit the S key, and in the symmetry panel options, you can simply disable the visibility of the plane. It will still keep it active, however, you just won't see it in the viewport. I'm going to switch back to the build brush. Just going to kind of carve out this inner part here. Then build up the rib cage area. Hold the shift key to smooth a bit. Try extrude and bring the intensity down somewhat. And while I'm at it, I should mention that directly to the left of the radius slider in the toolbar, you have two icons. One is either a mouse or a stylus. So when the stylus is visible, that means you're in brush pressure sensitivity mode, which will affect the radius of your brush stroke as you apply pressure. So when you go back to the mouse icon, it disables the ability to modulate radius with your stroke. Switching back to the grow brush, and as you can see, as you brush, it really smooths quite a bit. And for anyone who may be new to 3D Coat and seeing this for the first time, the way you adjust your brush radius is to right click and drag left and right, and that will increase or decrease the size of your brush. If you right click and drag up and down, then it's going to increase or decrease the intensity or the depth level of your brush. And you can see that value reflected by the colored profile inside that yellow circle. And that yellow circle is indicating the boundary of your brush radius, obviously. Just going to build up the shoulder area there, and I'm going to resample this model, increase the resolution a little bit. What I want to do now is go ahead and create an ear, and I'm going to use the Vox Layer tool to do that. And that's going to allow me to create an entirely separate object from the surface of the currently selected layer. So let's go to the E panel and choose the Close Spline tool, and I can just begin clicking to create initial points. I don't have to worry about using Bezier handles or anything like that. 3D Coat has 3 different spline point types. So when you're done, you just hit the Escape key. That will establish the initial state of the spline. And then you can hover over the individual points and reposition them individually. You can also hover over any point and right click to change its point type from standard spline to hard edge to B-spline, and you can just continue right clicking to cycle in between those different modes. If you want to delete a point, just hover over it and hit the delete key. If you want to add a point along the spline, you can just click anywhere along that green line. Hit that little toggle and chose transform all, and that way I could reposition the entire spline if I need, and rotate it, scale it, and so on. So I just hit the enter key to set the selection. Now all I have to do is hit the apply button and it will create this new object. Obviously I'd want to adjust the parameters first so that I get the desired thickness and also the offset amount from the surface of the original object, and then hit the apply button or the enter key. And what happened here is when you hit apply and you undo, 3D Coat by default doesn't delete that newly created layer because it creates one for you. So for whatever reason, if you need to make another attempt, you simply delete the one it just created, go back to your original layer and try once more. Once we're relatively happy with our newly created object, we can hit the escape key to drop the spline. And if you want to extrude it after the fact, you can right click on the layer and choose extrude. That will just extrude the object along the normals. You can adjust the extrusion level. Let's try and extrude a little bit more. I think that's thick enough. So I'm going to use the pose tool now. Using the line selection method, 3D Coat is going to create this gradient linear fall off. This gizmo is fairly straightforward and easy to understand. You have a pivot point on one end, and then you can grab the green dot at the other end to realign the entire gizmo however you need. The little bar in the middle just cycles between the different transform modes, whether you're scaling, rotating, or moving. Let's now switch to the ring selection method, and it will create a gradient ring in between the two selected points. And click the middle handle to change to a move transform mode. So you move in global space or along a given axis along that gizmo. Switch to the move tool to do some further tweaking here. Once I'm done here with the initial shape of the ears, I'm going to merge these two objects back together in order to make it one uniform and contiguous object. And that's where voxels really excel, because it really allows you to almost melt or weld objects together very nicely. So let's go ahead and stop right here, and we'll pick up in the next video resuming our work on the ear section here. So stay tuned, we'll see you next video.